I'd like to introduce our state legislature candidates who I know you are all excited to hear from this evening. We are joined by the candidates for the for the general election for the Kansas Senate District 34, Kansas District 102, and Kansas House of Representatives District 104. The districts which did not have opposition in the election will not be on the stage tonight. So we'll begin with Kansas Senate District 34, includes Shanna Henry of Cheney and opponent Michael Murphy of Sylvia. Let's give them a warm welcome. Next, the Kansas House of Representatives District 102, incumbent Jason Probst and Kyler Sweely, both from Hutchinson. Welcome, gentlemen. And lastly, the candidates for District 104, Lynette Krieger-Zook of Buhler and incumbent Paul Wagoner from Hutchinson. Let's give them a warm welcome. Candidates, we're all very grateful for your participation tonight. So to go over the format for this evening, again, like the other session, we will open with a 2-minute opening statement from each of the candidates, and we will close again with a 2-minute closing. A series of questions that has been prepared by our Public Policy Committee will be asked, and the candidates will begin responding in order by district number on my left and alphabetically by last name, and then we will rotate the first respondent to each subsequent question, and I will announce that at the beginning of each question. Candidates, you'll have 1 minute to respond, and then we will have a 30-second opportunity for a rebuttal by the opponent that was first to answer each question. So to keep things on time, we hope to have time for about 6 to 8 questions tonight. Seth Farley is down in front with our Hutch chamber, and he will be timing for this race, and he will hold up a yellow card when there are 30 seconds left on the timer. When time is up, you will hear this sound, and he will hold up the red card to alert you, and we reserve the right to jump in if the responses go too long. For the audience, of course, again, we ask you to please be respectful of all of the candidates on the stage, refrain from interruptions or obstructing the view of those seated behind you. Applause is welcome, and please keep other noise, though, to a minimum. And lastly, please make sure to silence your cell phones. Thank you for your cooperation on that. So the order of responses, again, will be by district number and last name. We are ready for the opening statement, so we will get started. Kansas Senate District candidate, Miss Shanna Henry.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, I am Shanna Henry, and I presently live in Kingman County, way up almost to Sedgwick County near Cheney, the town of Cheney. Now, the district that I'm running for is all of Reno County, all of Kingman County, where I live, and all of Barber County, all the way down to the Oklahoma border. Just a little background on who I am and where I came from. I am a 4th generation Kansan from a McPherson County family farm. I grew up working for my dad. That was my first job, but he paid me well, which I was very happy about. He always said, "I'd rather pay you because I know you'll take care of the equipment." We raised our family. My husband and I raised our family at our home of 29 years in the country in Kingman County near Cheney. I am currently retired, but enjoyed a successful career in the telecommunications and in the solar energy industry. As a stay-at-home mom, I was a very active volunteer in leadership roles at local schools, PTAs, and 4-H clubs. I also served on the Kingman County Extension Executive Board and on the Kingman County Economic Development Council. Now that I'm retired, I am experienced and ready to serve the constituents of Senate District 34, continuing my lifetime of public service. Thank you, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for hosting this and putting this on for us so that we can get our messaging out, and we really appreciate this opportunity to share our views.
Thank you, Ms. Henry. And next, we will hear from her opponent in District 34, Mr. Michael Murphy.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Michael Murphy, and I'm running for the Kansas Senate District 34. Appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight and share some of my views and ideas and vision for the district and for Kansas. My wife Janice and I have been married for 43 years. We have 4 adult children, 14 grandchildren. I had a career as a captain with United Airlines. And after retiring from that job, we built a house in western Reno County. It's now a bed and breakfast, and also has a small farm and ranch operation. So I'm involved in business as well as some ag work. I've served as township trustee. I've served on various livestock boards over the years. I was managing editor of a national magazine. I wrote for 3 different online magazines. I'm the author of the novel Spare Time, and I'm concluding my 4th year as representative for the 114th District. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Next, we will hear from the candidates from Kansas House District 102. First, the incumbent, Representative Jason Probst.
Thank you. Thank you, Deborah, for hosting this tonight, and thank you all of you for coming out. I think this is a really important part of the process, and I'm glad that you all took the time to come and listen to us. My name is Jason Probst. I'm the representative for the 102nd District. I was appointed at the end of 2017 and then ran my first election in 2018. Graduated from Nickerson High School, then from HCC, and then Baker University with a degree in management. In the legislature, I've served as the ranking member on the Commerce Committee, which is a really active committee. We hear a lot of things that deal directly with business development and economic development. So a lot of interesting topics come through the committee there. Also serve on the Agriculture Committee, and it's maybe a little less interesting, but no less important. You know too, don't you? And then also I serve on the executive team of the Legislative Post-Audit Committee, which might be my favorite committee because it functions as the state's auditor. We can ask for an audit on any topic we can imagine in that committee, and I really enjoy that because for someone who spent a lot of years doing research and writing stories about the community when I worked for the Hutchinson News, this is right up my alley because I get to dig deep into some of these issues. I've lived here my entire adult life, except for a few years that I moved away, raised my kids here. I've got 2 children, 2 grandchildren, who I spend as much time with as I can. Election season interferes with that quite a bit, which I don't appreciate, but I do like that I get to spend time with them. The 102nd District is basically the south side of Hutchinson, and I think there are some real unique challenges for the south part of town. And that is one reason that I'm running for office again. I think it's really, really important that we have voices from different parts of the community. This is not a homogeneous place. We have a lot of diversity here, and we have a lot of different needs here. And the needs in my district are quite different than the needs in the other part of the city. And so I think it's important to have that voice in Topeka.
Thank you, Representative Probst. And next, we will hear from your opponent, Mr. Kyler Sweely.
I'm Kyler Sweely. I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight. It's a pleasure to be able to sit here and speak to you guys tonight. So I grew up in Newton, Kansas, born and raised, 25 miles down the road. I've never denied the fact, even though it seems to be the biggest topic of discussion, that I'm from Newton and not Hutch. I've been a lifelong Kansas resident. I went to Newton public schools my whole life. And then after high school, I fulfilled my dream of serving this country. So I enlisted in the United States Army, where I planned to make that my career. I was a sergeant and a tank gunner stationed at Fort Bliss. I was deployed 2 times in my first little couple months, under 3.5 years. Once on a combat deployment to the Middle East, and then once also to Eastern Europe. So when I came back, I re-upped and I went to Fort Benning in Georgia to go to the schoolhouse and teach the future officers of the armor branch. And then unfortunately, due to circumstances and injuries on my first deployment, I was medically discharged from the Army, and kind of threw off my plans I had for my whole life. So I started to study and go to college, where I majored in finance and economics. Then I've always been interested in politics, and I accepted a job in Topeka on the financial side of things and the budget side of things. So I served as the committee assistant for the Transportation and Public Safety Committee, where I worked on the committee for a lot of law enforcement agencies like the KBI, Kansas Highway Patrol, Department of Corrections, and also the Department of Transportation. And that's where I kind of fell in with the financial side of politics and saw what the need was in Topeka, and that was being not fulfilled. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Sweely. And next we will hear from the candidates for the Kansas House of Representatives District 104, beginning with Ms. Lynette Krieger-Zook.
Thank you to the Hutch Chamber and all of you that are present here tonight. I'm Lynette Krieger-Zook, and I'm running for Kansas House of Representatives because it's time we have a representative that listens and responds to you, the needs and the voters in District 104. I moved here to teach at the Early Education Center and then over to Hutchinson Public Schools, where I retired as a special education teacher and continue to substitute. The fun part in walking is I've discovered many of my students are now my voters. I grew up in Denver, moved to Kansas to go to, in Haviland, it was then called Friends Bible College, lived in Wichita, and then moved here, like I said, to teach at Early Ed Center. My husband David and I have lived in Bueller for 31 years, raising our 4 children and now indulging our 4 grandchildren. We are an active part of our community, and we continue to serve and volunteer right here in Reno County. I care deeply about the communities in my district and have walked and knocked on over 5,000 doors in Inman, Bueller, and Hutchinson, and at every door I ask, what is important to you when you vote? Oftentimes they are taken back with a question, as I really truly want to listen and hear from them. I want you to know I've had great civil conversations with everyone, including those with very opposing views. I have heard stories and concerns of the voters in McPherson County and in Reno County, and will continue to walk and listen to you. And in addition, I've had the privilege of registering new voters ages 18 to 73. I believe in the principles of integrity, accountability, and community. And along with my faith, these principles will guide my decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Krieger-Zook. Next, we will hear from the incumbent in District 104, Representative Paul Wagner.
Yes, thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Chamber, for sponsoring the debate, and for all those who are in the audience and also online. I will go to a somewhat different opening statement, just simply because it's all a little bit biography, which, of course, I am a Hutchinson native. I grew up here near 17th and Plum, right on the border between the 102nd and the 104th. Went to Graber Elementary, Central Junior High, Hutch High School. I am a University of Kansas graduate with a degree in both business and history, have a master's degree in history from Trinity University in Illinois. I've actually been always social studies minded, always history minded, always, read the newspaper, a lot of magazines as a kid growing up. So I had always been interested in sort of politics in general. I had actually helped Ronald Reagan in his first run for president when I was still a teenager up in Kansas City when the Republican convention was there. But I will say, I think it's very important for folks to state clearly what they believe and to state it and not be evasive as to where their positions are or where they stand. And I think when I first ran for office in 2018 in a Republican primary, that was kind of one of the things that in going door to door and talking with people, as far as people, they had clarity with where I stood. I had been made a community columnist, sort of the designated conservative columnist for the Hutchinson News back in 2014 through an unusual chain of events, but it did definitely help people. It helped clarify my thinking, and also gave me a point of actually doing research on topics and not simply accepting sort of the status quo narrative. I have been very diligent in my work in Topeka, as we will hear, I'm sure, throughout this debate. And I really, definitely stand by my votes and stand by the principles that I campaign on door to door. Thank you.
All right, thank you, candidates. Let's begin with our first question, and we will begin with Senate District 34, Shanna Henry, followed by Michael Murphy. First question. If elected, what committees would you want to serve on, and how would you ensure you are representing the constituents' interests on those committees?
I will admit I don't know all the names of the committees. I know there are many, but I would want to be on whatever committee has to do with healthcare insurance and the efforts toward Medicaid expansion. This is one of the top interests of my campaign, and one of the main reasons I am very concerned about the state of Kansas. So having to do with the expansion of Medicaid in Kansas would be a high point for me. Also, having grown up on a farm, I would love to be on the agriculture committee. And with my experience in solar energy industry, I would love to be on anything that has to do with renewable energy and furthering our independence from oil and gas, fossil fuels, and pollution of our planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Henry. Now we'll have the response from Mr. Michael Murphy.
I've been working for the last few years. I've been working across the rotunda with the Senate, and one of the places I'd really like to be is Fed and State. That really fits with a lot of the work that I've done. I've also requested, put in when they've asked me where I'd be interested in going, I said Fed and State and utilities and tax, and so those are areas where I think that I can be very useful and to get some good stuff done.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. And Ms. Henry, you have a chance for a 30-second comment.
Yes, utilities are also an incredible thing to worry about. Utility prices are going up everywhere. Taxes are going up everywhere. So I understand your desire to be on a committee like that. That would also be something that I would be interested in. There are just so many committees that are valuable and so much work to be done. So I appreciate everyone's interest and hard work in those areas.
All right, thank you, Ms. Henry. Next, we'll move on to District 102, Representative Jason Probst.
Thank you. I'm pretty happy where I am. I have really developed some good relationships on the Commerce Committee, and I feel that I've been really effective there. And agriculture, I think my knowledge and my geography here in this part of the state is really important to have my voice on the Agriculture Committee. And of course, as I said before, absolutely love post-audit. The other part of this question about how you would represent your constituents, I think I would not do anything different than I'm doing now. When I encounter legislation, I tend to call people in the district who I know have more knowledge about this than I do. If something comes up about the disability community, I call my friends in the disability community and I ask them, is this legislation helpful or harmful? That's the practice that I've put in place since I've been in the legislature, and it's served me well, and I think it's served the community very well as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Probst. And next, we will hear from Tyler Sweeley.
I apologize. Did you say committee or committees?
I actually said committees. Yes, plural.
The main committee that I'd like to serve on would be appropriations. So this is where all the budget goes through, a lot of the legislation on how it gets to the House floor. And this is ultimately, how we cut manage spending from overspending a budget year after year in terms of fighting for property tax. So also I'd like to serve on tax. The governor came out and said last week that there will be no property tax cuts in 2025. So I think that we need to get a real plan and not just concede to whatever she says and, actually get property tax. I hear it every single door. That's one of the biggest problems in the state. And the legislature has definitely failed on giving those tax cuts and those tax breaks to the hardworking taxpayers that actually deserve it. So those would be the main two right there. And also, obviously biased, I'd be on transportation and public safety, the committee that I served on as a committee assistant, and fully funding the State Highway Fund and fully funding the fight against fentanyl with the Kansas Bureau of Investigation.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeley. And Mr. Probst, do you have any rebuttal?
Well, it's interesting that we talk about cutting in appropriations because we now have at least 2 news stories that are out there talking about how Republicans on the Appropriations Committee have added through budget provisos $210 million to the budget. What happens in appropriations is not cutting the budget. It is people putting their pork projects in it, and it's controlled by Republicans. He's not going to get on that committee and cut the budget. He's going to do exactly what Kansas Chamber of Commerce and Americans for Prosperity tell him to do, and that will be to increase the budget to their favor. I've fought for tax cuts for regular people and voted against corporate tax cuts.
Thank you, Mr. Probst. Next, moving on to House of Representatives District 104, we'll begin with Lynette Krieger-Zook.
Well, the logical place for me would be on anything that regards education. That's been my career. I've been an educational advocate for the last 40 years, starting in when I was a daycare director in Wichita advocating for early childhood. I also have a great concern for social welfare, and it is important to go and ask the people. When we were asked a question on the Hutch News about homelessness, I called New Beginnings and asked, what's important to you in the legislature? So you go back to the experts and ask them. I've also served on KSDE committees. Currently, I am sitting on a committee of 10 of us that are working on standards for college students for birth through grade 3, setting the standards for the next 10 years in our college setting. I will, of course, serve where I'm needed, and I think it's important in the legislature to have, particularly in education, someone who's had their feet on the ground making decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Krieger-Zook. And next, we will hear from incumbent Paul Wagner.
No, thank you for the question. I'm currently Vice Chairman of House Elections, which is definitely a committee I enjoy serving with and would appreciate continuing on that, also with insurance. I'm also very not concerned, but interested in the appropriations. I mean, spending has been definitely out of control here the last 3 or 4 years in Topeka. It's gone up from like it was just over $7 billion when I first arrived. It's over $10.5 billion currently. I think it's very much a misstatement by the representative from the 102nd district about his status, because actually he fought against tax cuts for the first 3 years I was there in the Capitol. He was a constant thorn in the side of actually giving people what were called the Trump tax cuts, as far as making them applicable to regular folks in Kansas and not having what had been a bill that had been otherwise passed in multiple other states. I think that's a misstatement on his part.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. And Ms. Zook, you have a chance for a 30-second rebuttal.
Can I cede my minutes to Jason Probst?
No.
There are different news items coming out, and that has included that the Republican leadership has scolded the Republicans for pork funding and being too greedy with money. It is time that we work across the aisle and serve our constituents in lowering taxes, in providing affordable housing, and making economic abilities that we can live happily, safely.
Thank you, Ms. Zook. The next question will be for the Kansas Representative District 102, Kyler Sweeley, followed by Jason Probst. The question: the Chamber supports fiscal responsibility on tax policy at all levels of government. How would you make Kansas more competitive while also giving thoughtful consideration to investments that enhance the quality of life and growth in our state?
I think we've had a big problem with, obviously people leaving the state of Kansas and not staying in. We continue to have counties and every county around the state raise property tax year after year, and I don't think the legislature has done enough. We kept the mill levy at 20 points under the scare that we might not fully fund education, but also there's things to counteract that to fully fund education and lower the mill levy. So I think that we need to incentivize people and people to move to Kansas, corporations to move to Kansas, jobs to move to Kansas, for the younger generation to get good high-paying jobs and actually be able to afford a house without going bankrupt, and actually being able to afford groceries. Finally, they got rid of the grocery sales tax. It's been there for years. They're going to talk about a tax break that they did this last year, and I promise you nobody in the crowd will feel it, and they'll campaign on it the whole time. They always have. They're finally cutting Social Security and keeping the older generation and being able to actually retire in the state of Kansas. So I think we failed at that.
Thank you, Mr. Sweely. And next, we will hear from incumbent Jason Probst.
Well, one thing I always like is every election I don't get to just run against my opponent, I get to run against Paul also. And then this year I get to run against Kansas Chamber and Americans for Prosperity and Chris Kobach, so it's a lot of fun. The tax package we passed this year has meaningful reform in it. The reason it took so long to get the grocery bills lowered on taxes is not because of Democrats, it's because of Republicans, because Republican leadership stopped it so they could hold it until after an election. These people do whatever they have to do to win elections and get power. And they cost you money every year so that they can hold it over your heads and win another election. They did not want to give that win to the governor, and that's what happened. The tax cuts Paul's talking about allowed corporations to set off losses forever and never pay taxes again, and it allowed them to bring money offshore that they had hidden in tax havens back into the state for free. You're damn right I voted against it.
Thank you, Mr. Probst. And next, a rebuttal from Mr. Sweely.
And the Kansas Chamber and the AFP talks come up. I'm not answering to anybody. I answer to my own values, my own morality, and what I believe in. Jason talks about, recently he's been talking about flat tax, and the big bad Republicans are trying to do a flat tax and make everything go bad. He's never been for it, nothing like that. 2023, Senate Bill 169, Jason voted for a flat tax of 5.15%. He'll deny it. The voting record shows it. It's clear as day. But we're just talking about, it's always the big bad Republicans. The governor and the Democrats vetoed 7 or 8 tax bills this year and continue to do it. Called a special session at $60,000 to $80,000 a day out of taxpayers' money.
Next, we'll move on. District 104, Representative Paul Wagner.
Yeah, actually, sorry. Get my mic on. Could you repeat the precise question again? I kind of
I'm
lost.
happy to. The Chamber supports fiscal responsibility on tax policy on all levels of government. How would you make Kansas more competitive while also giving thoughtful consideration to investments that enhance the quality of life and growth in our state?
Yes, it's actually a very good question because the fiscal responsibility aspect of it, the state of Kansas for the last number of years has actually been fiscally responsible in that spending has been much lower than where taxes are. And you can only do that as long as you keep spending under control. If spending, which has jumped up to $10.5 billion, this last year, if it's not literally brought under control, which the Republican leadership, I might ask, has already noted that one of the main problems with spending being out of control or being higher than it should be is frankly that we start with the governor's budget as a baseline budget rather than going to the past prior year's expenses. Plus also that the legislature, if you're on a budget committee, which I have been on, is that, you literally have multiple budgets. You have a 1 hour time frame, 1.5 hours to deal with them. And you literally have no sense that you can really ask serious questions, even when you do some research on these and really try and have something. I think the best methodology is to have the legislature be more active in controlling the budget rather than allowing the governor to set the agenda.
Next, we'll move on to Lynette Krieger-Zook.
Regarding tax policy, thoughtful consideration of tax policies as a Hutchinson-Reno County Chamber priority. That means working together across party lines with local, county, and state officials to meet the needs of individuals, families, small and large businesses. Accountability is important to me, so being fiscally responsible with the revenue is important. And community. How will this support the people who live in our district and in our town? So we need to take time to work across the aisle and do solid research before making votes in the late hours of the night.
Thank you, Ms. Zook. And Mr. Wagner, you have a chance for a rebuttal.
Yes, thank you. I would say, the sad fact of the matter is that the Democrat party in Topeka, such as it is, is constantly on the push for higher budgets, for more spending. It's really been up to your Republican majority to actually, in the sense that any money is held back, to be the ones responsible to do that. I would say that you really have to look very closely at any budget item, and you have to be ready to vote no, and not just continue to pass the buck down the line.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Same question for the Kansas Senate District 34. We'll begin with Michael Murphy.
Thank you. Kansas is the 12th highest tax burden on its citizens. I think that's crazy. We need to do something about it. Listening to some of the commissioners early, talking, there's a lot of things that sound good. They all say, well, we need to do this and we need to do this. You're going to have to raise taxes to do all that. Property taxes are probably the biggest thing that people have to pay. I think we need to look at ways to curb that. And I've got some ideas. We did have some amendments to the budget that got stripped out and all like that, but I'm going to keep working on that. And I do have a tax plan that does get rid of property tax.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. And next, a response from candidate Shanna Henry.
That's a lot to take in. Tax policy is made by everyone in the legislature. In my opinion, the reason taxes have gone up so much, they are going up on the hardworking families of Kansas and middle income, middle class people, and the wealthy are not paying their fair share, and neither are the corporations. If we need to get that balance back to where those that have the most can pay the most in taxes, they get so many breaks that the average Kansan citizen cannot take. We do not have all the loopholes that they do, and you have to consider the percentage of taxes that we pay based on our income. That is even more important than the tax rate for our citizens of Kansas. It's all, do I have how many more seconds? Okay. Thank you very much. I'm strong about this. I have a lot of strong feelings about tax policy.
Thank you, Ms. Henry. And Mr. Murphy, do you have any rebuttal?
Well, the tax policy is one thing and spending is another. We're going to have to cut some spending. A lot of things sound good, but all those good sounding things cost money. There's a lot of people get special deals, and the special deals have to be taken away because of that special deal pushes the burden on you and on me. There's nothing special about me. I pay taxes just like you do. So we need to kind of be cognizant of that and make it a better place for everybody. You start getting these special deals to try to draw people in. It's better off to have an equal playing field. It's better for everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Moving on to question 3, we will begin with District 104, Lynette Krieger-Zook, followed by Representative Wagner. Question 3. Hutchinson Community College is an important pipeline of talent in our workforce development in Reno County and the region. What do you believe the role of state government should be in funding for technical training and funding for deferred maintenance of community college facilities?
When we talk about economic development, I absolutely look to the programs that both Hutch High School has with our Career and Tech Building and Hutchinson Community College. These kids can come out of school as welders. They get their certificates as auto body repair, car repair, home builders, bricklayers. It is the backbone and the infrastructure of our community. So by supporting Hutchinson Community College, supporting the Career and Tech Academy, and supporting the infrastructure, that is looking towards the future, continuing to build the workforce, building our economy, and keeping our people here in Reno County and McPherson County so that our communities and our rural communities can grow.
Thank you, Ms. Krieger-Zook. And next, Representative Paul Wagner.
No, HCC is an incredible asset for the city of Hutchinson, or for the region, Reno County in total. The whole notion, and you do see this, where in certain states, the community colleges are much more aimed at, technical training and such, rather than just being 2 years on your way to a 4-year school. And frankly, in the way the job market is, the way just cost of colleges are, that's a hugely smart move on the part of the state of Kansas to have that type of focus. That being said, I will say the question of deferred maintenance, that if you have a question of deferred maintenance, it really goes back a lot to the trustees of the university, as it would be, as to what they've done with their budget over the years. We had a similar situation in Topeka where the colleges or the university's regent system came hat in hand, wanting, I think it was like $40 more million for deferred maintenance. And the question really comes up, you guys have these huge budgets. I mean, KU, some of these colleges will have literally almost $1 billion budget. What have you been doing with your money? Have you been spending it wisely? And thus the deferred maintenance question would go away.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. And Ms. Krieger-Zook, any rebuttal? All right. Next, Kansas Senate District 34, we will begin with Shanna Henry.
Now you've touched on the second thing that I'm most concerned about, and that's our education system. Not only our public education system in the state, but also at the Hutchinson Community College level and the Regents level. One of the things that I'm most proud about Kansas is all the effort and investment that we have put in our college and education structure. This is what builds a community and builds a state. I'm happy to have had a wonderful high school education in McPherson from first through senior year, and also being able to have the basics to go on to college, those fundamental skills that we need to make our community and our district successful.
Thank you, Ms. Henry. And next we will hear from Representative Michael Murphy.
Okay, this is something I've actually gotten accomplished in the last few years. A lady came to me about 3 years ago, and there was a problem that we've got this great program for kids to take in high school, to take a lot of these CTE classes, but they were not getting a certification. In many cases, these rural areas, they just couldn't afford to take the test. And so I got legislation through, it took me 2 years, but we got legislation through where that test is now paid for if they're unable to pay for it themselves. We have increased that program now. From 2 years ago, it had 2,500 students in it. Now it has 9,000. And this is going to have a great impact on getting these kids to have a good job coming out and stay in Kansas rather than going somewhere else.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. And Ms. Henry, any rebuttal?
That's good to hear. It is. Anything we can do to emphasize and to strengthen our education system, whether it's from kindergarten on through college, and is so important for the well-being of our state and our citizens, and for people to be able to go out and work productive jobs and make decent incomes, to have a living wage to pay for their family. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Henry. Next, District 102, Representative Jason Probst.
Thank you. I think one thing about being here for a while is that I've had a chance to see how things have developed over the years, and it's been exciting to see the collaboration between Hutchinson Community College and the high school with the development of the Career and Technical Education Center. We now attract students from area counties who come here to get technical education, and upon graduation immediately find really well-paying jobs. I think that's a real asset to the county. On the Commerce Committee, I've been really involved in getting things through, like the Promise Act Scholarship, which provides basically cost-free for scholarships for people that want technical education. And we also created and put some tax credits in for businesses for apprenticeship programs to help those people once they're out of school if they want to do an apprenticeship. Those are the sort of long-range forward ideas that we need to keep working on, that support our community colleges, that support our workers, and make sure that we're creating opportunities for people in our community.
Thank you, Mr. Probst. Next, we'll hear from Kyler Sweely.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but obviously everyone up here, agrees that the career technical experience and education is obviously very vital to this state. We're obviously a huge gap in trades and people filling those jobs out of high school and everything. And, there is programs for expedited trade training in high school to get that certification by the time you graduate and continue straight into the workforce at 18. I think that's a gap that we definitely need to fill. And, we have a workforce, but we also have to give them the correct certifications and training to be able to get out in the workforce. So I definitely believe that we need to do everything we can to fill up the workforce and fill up these trades, this gap that we're missing. And, obviously to preferred maintenance within a reasonable budget, obviously I do believe that the state has some sort of, or not some sort, but a sort of responsibility to these schools and to these communities that continue to fund these schools and continue to fund these projects to get Kansas ready, to get these communities ready for the workforce.
Mr. Probst. All right, moving on to question 4. We'll come back over here to my left, Senate District 34, and we will begin with Michael Murphy on this question. The Kansas State Fair is an important economic driver of tourism in Kansas as well as locally. What is your position on funding for deferred maintenance for facilities on the fairgrounds?
Good question. Primarily, the state fair generates its own revenue and is able to do most of that. I was involved this past year with a project with the 1861 Club, and we helped that get on the ground and get up, and actually it was open in time for the fair, and pretty nice setup. So the state fair is an important part of our community, and I'm always hesitant to put tax dollars into something when you don't really need to. And as long as that can be self-sustaining, I think it's best for it to do that. There have been grants and things like that that have been available, and those have been given to them. We did during COVID. We gave them some money to help them get through that time when they didn't have a fair. So there's things like that we can do, but by and large, they really need to try to make it on their own.
All right, thank you, Mr. Murphy. And Ms. Henry?
The Kansas State Fair is a thing to cherish, and it should be supported. I must admit, I don't know a lot of what you're talking about, the funding for deferred maintenance. Could you repeat that again? Funding?
Sure. What is your position on funding for deferred maintenance for the facilities on the fairgrounds? And know that the state fairgrounds is state-owned.
Okay. I have to admit that I don't know a lot about this, but one of the things I would do when elected senator, I would dig in and do the research and find out what I need to know to make a good decision. And as an outsider that doesn't live in Hutchinson, but Kingman County, I've been coming to the Kansas State Fair since I was about 6 years old. And I showed in 4-H shows here. I've been a part of the fair. It's a wonderful thing that we have. A lot of states do not support their state fairs anymore, and they're failing. But we have one of the best state fairs in the country, and I think it's something we all should preserve.
Thank you, Ms. Henry. And Mr. Murphy, any rebuttal?
Not really a rebuttal, but just, I think we've got the administrator for the fair has, been here for 4 years now, or 3. He's done a really, really good job. And I think the best thing you can do about the fair is to build it up and let it be a good, strong draw to the community and to make it self-sustaining. If we have to help it, then it isn't working.
All right, thank you, Mr. Murphy. Moving on to District 102, Kyler Sweely.
Can you repeat the whole question, the first part of the question, please?
Yes. The Kansas State Fair is an important economic driver of tourism in Kansas and locally. What is your position on funding for deferred maintenance for the facilities on the fairgrounds?
With how big the Kansas State Fair is, obviously in Hutchinson, it's outside of my district, but right outside that, directly impacts the district. We need to do everything we can. There's always been the talks that the state fair is going to leave Hutchinson, or if it's going to move somewhere else, or more populated or more economic developed part of the state. But I mean, this is pretty much a principle and a staple of this community, and we need to keep it in Hutchinson. And we need to do everything we can to keep it here. going off self-funding and everything, but we also need to look at it as a state perspective, that this is such a big thing in our community that the state representatives, state senators obviously need to do their part in continuing to advocate for this state fair and continuing to advocate for the constituents.
Thank you, Mr. Sweely. And Mr. Probst?
Thank you. I agree that we need to put money into the fair to bring it kind of up to modern standards. And one example is the Bison Arena. There's a big project happening there, and there was some appropriation added to that. And I think that's a good deal. But I also agree with Mike. I mean, the fair is largely self-funded through its own fees and what it generates from ticket admission and everything else like that. But we did another benefit of having been in this community for a long time. You get to see how things unfold. The state legislature was supposed to fund a 20-year master plan for the state fair, but then, as the state often does, they fail to fulfill their obligation that they make in previous years. But one of the best things we did was allow the fair to capture its sales tax that it generates on the fairgrounds. That has provided a lot of benefit to the fair. It's improved it. It also gave the fair an incentive to do better, to host more events, and to be more creative in generating more income. And that's been a virtuous cycle that's benefited all of us in the community and has minimized state resources going to the fair.
Thank you, Mr. Probst. And Mr. Sweely, any rebuttal?
No rebuttal.
All right. Next, moving on to District 104, we will begin with Representative Paul Wagoner.
Yes, no, the state fair is in my district. I grew up near the state fair. I really take an active interest in it. I do think, really, I think over the last couple of years, you've seen a lot of improvements made to the fair. Of course, the fair is a fee-funded agency, basically, but its building projects are primarily funded through either special appropriations from the legislature or somewhat as referenced as far as being able to collect some more of the sales tax. I do think questions of deferred maintenance, again, the fair has to also realize they live in an ecosystem where they really have to pay attention to the totality of the interest in the state, because you had a very just mind-boggling attempt to tear down the racetracks and to totally do away with that on a very poorly figured math formula as far as trying to claim that it actually lost money and such. I think if any of you who paid attention to the topic, it actually has done quite well, and I think using the state fair more is really the key rather than trying to cut it down on options.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Next, we will hear from Lynette Krieger-Zuck.
Well, I want to thank Jason for educating me. It's lovely to be a part of a group that understands our community and shares that information. Who doesn't love the fair except for traffic? When you live here in Hutchinson, we do know it brings people from all over the state and across the nation. Actually, it's a great tourist thing to put Hutchinson. It is the heart of rural Kansas. A master plan to be funded would be an interesting conversation to certainly have. I do think that we do need to continue to be forward-looking, including using the fairgrounds more. Certainly the new building is allowing that. But when you let maintenance go, which is what maintenance deferment does, it compounds the problem, and we need to figure out with the state fair how to make sure that maintenance is kept up to date so that it doesn't cost more down the road.
Thank you, Ms. Krieger-Zuck. And next, we'll have a rebuttal from Mr. Wagner.
Not so much a rebuttal, but an additional comment. We had a bill that was proposed this year, to ensure that someone from Reno County is actually on the state fair board. It was always considered kind of a given. It's actually not in state statute. Currently everybody's appointed by the governor, which is also maybe a question that could be changed. But again, there's a lot of passion about the state fair and the property in the community. Probably one of the best grassroots organized effort I saw was to save the racetrack. That was a lot of people gave them no chance, and they actually pulled it off. And so a lot of credit to them.
All right, moving on to question 5. We will begin with District 102, Representative Probst. The question: Hutch Regional, as one of the largest employers in Reno County, has come out in favor of Medicaid expansion. What is your current position on Medicaid expansion in the state of Kansas?
My current position is the same position I've had from day one. It is morally reprehensible to not do this, and it's fiscally unsound not to do it. And we'll hear from my neighbor to the north here in a moment. He'll give us all the reasons why it's bad and how it doesn't work elsewhere. But I do need someone to explain to me how refusing a program that we created a fee fund for, so that hospitals were paying the state portion of the cost, that would draw in millions of dollars to our community to help offset uncompensated care at our hospital. But because we didn't do that, we ended up with layoffs and restructuring at the hospital. Somebody needs to explain to me how not accepting Medicaid expansion is good for the residents of Hutchinson and good for our healthcare infrastructure. I still have not heard a legitimate answer to that. We get into these state level, national level issues, but right here on the ground in our community, it's been very bad, this failure.
Thank you, Mr. Probst. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Sweely.
I'm not opposed to any piece of legislation going into, the legislature if I do get elected. I think that we need to do everything we can to protect the uninsured and give them health care, and also protect our rural local hospitals that I think we have not done enough for in these reimbursement rates and everything. And they continue to fight this year. They did some good stuff with reimbursement rates, and we're continuing to get better. But the big topic is always the reimbursement rates for these local hospitals, and that's why they're closing. But we're also looking at the big thing for the fight is, Congress appropriated 90% of this budget for all these states. They're going to pay 90% of this budget, and show of hands, who trusts Congress to an absolute T if they're going to continue to fulfill that promise? At an average rate, the states that have accepted Medicaid expansion have gone up over the expected budget up to 50% at an average rate. And I'm not just comfortable just jamming in something that we don't know what the actual budget will be able to do. Also, in this state legislature, it's always been a floor vote. It's only been in the committee once. It hasn't had due process. And I'm not going to support something that doesn't have work requirements.
Next, we'll hear the rebuttal from Mr. Probst.
There's a lot to cram into 30 seconds, so bear with me. It hadn't been discussed in committee because the leadership, Republican leadership in the House, has not allowed that to happen. Congress is paying 90%. They haven't backed out yet. If they do, we put in every version that we put out that there's a clawback clause we can escape and get out if they decide not to do that. But we had this same concern in the 60s about Medicare, and it hasn't happened. So this is a red herring. And I'm also glad to hear that he's open-minded to Medicaid expansion, because most Republicans do what their leadership tells them, and that has been a resounding no.
Thank you, Mr. Probst. We'll move on to House District 104, and we will begin with Lynette Krieger-Zook.
So for me, valuing life recognizes that healthcare access is truly a life and death issue. I know firsthand the devastating impact that not having health insurance can have. My sister died due to lack of health care. And I've seen firsthand my adult children forego medical treatment for years until it became critical and they've struggled to afford health care. We know people have died due to lack of health care, lack of Medicaid expansion, and that is on the Republicans that have continued to not bring to a vote to expand Medicaid. My opponent has said it would cost Kansas to expand Medicaid. And it has cost Kansas over a loss of $7 billion tax dollars given to the states on the East and West Coast that have taken advantage of Medicaid expansion. That money has been taken from each of us in this room. Medicaid expansion values the lives of our neighbors, those working low-wage and part-time jobs in childcare, retail, food services. I have advocated in Topeka for expanded Medicaid since 2017, and I will continue to be a voice for our families and workers.
Thank you, Ms. Zook. Next, we'll hear from Representative Wagner.
The Medicaid expansion debate, it has often predicated on a pile of falsehoods, much of which we've already heard here. The question about the $7 billion is just a kindergarten understanding of where tax money goes. Medicaid is the expansion part of it. This is actually funded through. It's not funded at all. I mean, frankly, it's funded through deficit spending. And so basically what you end up doing is you're taking the current needs of people currently and sending the bill to the grandchildren, years down the road. Further, the point you should remember is the Fort Scott Hospital that went under a number of years ago. They did a survey, and only 15% of the people in that county went to that hospital. They went to Joplin. They went to Pittsburgh. More often than not, the problem is that the hospital does not have support within the local community, that you don't want to mask one problem through a solution that was not even designed for that particular issue. The legislature did a lot more for the hospitals by actually expanding the percentage that we cover from normal Medicaid than anything that would be done with Medicaid expansion.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. And any rebuttal from Ms. Zook?
My opponent just told me I have a kindergarten understanding of Medicaid. I have advocated in Topeka. I want you to know I taught kindergarten for 20 years, and one of the rules in kindergarten is we don't call people names. That is not allowed.
Thank you, Ms. Zook. Moving on to District 34, we will begin with Shanna Henry.
Good. This is one time I'm glad to go first. All right. First of all, I'm going to rebut the man at the far end of the table. Medicaid expansion is not funded through deficit spending. It is funded through the taxpayer dollars that we have already paid into the system. And in the state of Kansas, according to the Alliance for a Healthy Kansas, we have already spent over $7.3 billion, and the clock is continually running. We have already lost over $7.3 billion from our taxpayers that goes into Medicaid that does not come back to our state for our citizens, for their health care needs, to benefit our state and the healthiness of our state. This is a crime as far as I'm concerned, an absolute crime and an abomination. This is the number one thing on my agenda and the number one thing I will fight for when I'm elected to the Senate.
Thank you, Ms. Henry. Next, we will hear from candidate Michael Murphy.
Yeah, you touched on something kind of interesting. We send all this money to Washington and then they send some of it back. Okay. That's a real problem. Now, that's the way it is. We can't just change it tomorrow. But the bottom line is the government is $35.7 trillion in debt. They're spending $1 trillion more every 100 days than what they bring in. $1 trillion in deficit spending every 100 days. So the money that comes back here, I don't care what pocket you take it out of and put it into. The bottom line is we've got a lot of problem there. Medicaid was designed for the intellectually and the physically disabled. And they keep getting pushed back. So every time we add something to it, add something to it, add something to it, they get pushed back, back, back. I think that's where we need to concentrate our efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Ms. Henry, do you have a rebuttal?
Mr. Murphy, what you said is just not accurate. That's over $7.3 billion that we have already sent to Washington, D.C. is kept in a separate account, and that would come back to our state if we would just go ahead and pass Medicaid expansion. That is our taxpayer dollars put into the system for Medicaid expansion, and because we won't do it, we're not getting our own taxpayer dollars back from Kansas back to our state to use for our people.
Thank you, Ms. Henry. Moving on to question 6, we will begin with District 104, Paul Wagner. What is your position on education funding, specifically your position related to public education, school choice, and funding for full-time pre-K?
The K-12 budget is basically over 50% of the state general fund budget. It is mostly shaped by judicial policy at this point, as far as the Supreme Court decision that came down a couple of years ago, where at this point the state was registered as fully funding the schools, and the good faith effort is just to keep up with inflation going forward. The real question has been, in the last number of years, has been as far as policy. As far as, are you going to allow parents to have a greater deal of choice? Are you going to allow people who have been put in situations where they would prefer an alternative, and will you in any way support them with that? Or will you just say that there's just one size fits all and you have to go to the most close public school? We have expanded where different districts where there's broader district options. Kansas, one clear problem with Kansas is we don't have very good charter school law as far as expanding that. And so I do appreciate what the legislature has been trying to do in kind of broadening the base for educational options for parents and students.
Thank you, Representative Wagner. And next we'll hear from Lynette Krieger-Zook.
Our tax dollars need to go to public schools that accept all children. Public dollars where programs and curriculums are transparent to the voters. The problem with following the children, which sounds reasonable, is that it will go to private schools, home schools, other micro schools with no accountability. Every one of us here want our tax dollars and to know where they're going to. That's why I support public dollars going to tax dollars. We do have strong private schools in our communities, and private dollars need to go to those private schools, and many of them do not want to be held to state accountability. I know many private schools and homeschools want the freedom to teach without KSD rules and regulations, but public schools meet those standards. Any voucher bill proposed where the money follows the children has zero accountability. In Arkansas, 90%. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zook. Any rebuttal from Representative Wagner?
Yes, thank you. We're all very familiar with 529 programs where you can get your money grown tax-free. It doesn't make a difference whether you go to KU, K-State, Tabor, Bethany, any college. I mean, it's up to your choice. It's not dictated by the government or by what the people in charge of a certain education department would agree. And I think expanding such things to the K through 12 level actually makes a lot of sense. Other states have done it and have actually seen very good results. Greater competition actually improves both public and private schools.
Thank you, Representative Wagner. Moving on to District 34, Michael Murphy.
Like has been said, the money that's spent in our education is, when you look at K-12 through higher ed, including the federal dollars, we're, on our omnibus bill, we're looking at like 61% of our budget. We're putting a lot of money in there. I'm in favor of people having school choice, but I think the simple way to do it is just with a tax credit. That way the schools money's not taken away from the school, but if somebody chooses to go either homeschool or go to a private school, they can keep a little bit of their tax dollars themselves and to help with that.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. And Ms. Henry?
I agree with Lynette on this one. Private dollars go to private schools, public dollars go to public schools, and that should not be differentiated in any way with tax credits. Tax credits is still a form of public funding to private schools because it's our taxpayer dollars. So it's still our public funding going to private schools if you do the approach that my opponent wants to take. This is not fair whatsoever to our public education system that has to provide an education for all students. They cannot pick and choose. They have to take the kids that have mental disabilities, individual disabilities, learning disorders. They have to take all students, and Lynette can talk much better to this than I can, but it is so important that we keep our public funding for public schools.
Thank you, Ms. Henry. Mr. Murphy, any rebuttal? Okay. And lastly, District 102, Kyler Sweeley.
I ultimately think, the decision of schooling should be down to the parents. I don't think that government should interfere. I don't think that government should decide how a child is raised in a school system. I don't think they should just dictate whatever public education or whatever education that the district that is, or whatever we're talking about. I do believe in school choice. I do believe that we should fully fund schools, and I do believe that we should fully fund special education. You know, we're talking about tax credits of the voucher program, but should tax credits go to a school that your child's not going to? Is that necessarily right? I mean, I think we need to look at the problem of, continue to fully fund schools and continue to have tax money go to public schools, private schools, homeschooling. It's a bigger thing in this area, that the parent should ultimately have that choice, but the parent's tax dollars should also follow the child and go to those same programs to directly impact that child, and they should be having a say-so in what their child is learning and being pretty much brought up to an adult. This is our future of Kansas. This is the future of us.
Thank you, Mr. Sweely. And Representative Probst.
I'm a little confused because my opponent just stated two competing positions at the same time. He said he supports fully funding schools and he supports school choice, and those two things are largely viewed as being incompatible with one another. We are going to educate children in public schools for a very long time. And we're going to, it's how we're going to educate most children. And children don't get to choose where they're born. They don't get to choose their parents. And we have an obligation then to do what we can to improve a system that is at its core, and always has been since the writing of the state's constitution, a long-term investment in our stability and in our growth and our financial prosperity. That's at its core what education is. It's not fair, and it's actually disingenuous to compare public education at the grade school level to college education, as the representative from the 4th did. Those are completely different things. A child born in any community deserves a decent education, and that's what our formula does.
Thank you, Representative Probst. Mr. Sweely, any rebuttal?
Every child is entitled to the utmost, education and support that they should deserve and belong in. Developing them as an adult and developing them as a Kansan and a part of our community. But also, I wouldn't be for public schools promoting things like DEI, and my opponent has. I don't believe in sending your school or your kids to school that promotes something that your family values are different or your family doesn't believe in. And I don't want kids being indoctrinated just because they're born in a certain area. And
Thank you, Mr. Sweely. That rounds out the questions for tonight. We will move on to closing statements. And again, we will begin with a 2-minute closing statement, beginning with House District 104 and candidate Paul Wagner.
Wow, that was quick. I'm going to have to kind of edit this, but thank you, Chamber, for sponsoring this debate, and for all those in the audience and online. When I was on this stage 6 years ago, I made my case to the voters of the 104th District. I told them that what I said in Hutchinson was how I would vote in Topeka. Voters appreciate clarity from those on the ballot. It builds trust. It means you can be held accountable. I explained in detail my positions on many issues, that my philosophy was clearly conservative, that I was against bigger government and more taxes, and that on social issues, I favor the conservative and traditional viewpoint. My opponents have always taken the opposite approach. They push for more and bigger government programs, embracing what is best called magical thinking, where big government exists, but that the necessary big taxes don't. I call their bluff both locally and up in Topeka. Bad policy should be opposed, whether it comes from the Democrat representative in the district next door, from the Kansas Democrat Party caucus, or from the policy proposals or veto pen at Cedar Crest. It's been a constant battle in Topeka to pass tax reform since 2019, but in the end, myself and GOP colleagues were successful, and that first success came in 2022. I support then and I support now better private health care options, expanded school choice, less regulatory power by Topeka bureaucrats, less arbitrary power in the hands of the governor, any governor, a flatter tax code, and a collegiate and K-12 system that is genuinely non-ideological and aims to teach and not indoctrinate, and where girls' sports are actually for girls. Is that really too much to ask? If Topeka's budget is growing faster than your paycheck, then we have a problem. Since 2021, the state general fund budget is up 42%, and the Kansans who are paying for it are lucky to have half that increase in their paychecks. I will work to bring the unsustainable growth down. We can have a better Kansas, a stronger Kansas, a Kansas that is more prosperous and free, and a better place to have kids and raise a family. That's why I'm running, and I truly appreciate a chance to discuss the issues with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. And next we'll hear closing statements from Lynette Krieger-Zook.
As you've heard tonight, there are many different distinctions between my opponent and myself. In fact, the reason I decided to run was in May, when my opponent was one of two that voted no on the final bipartisan vote to fully fund public education. In our district, that would affect Hutchinson, Inman, and Buhler school districts. And when I wrote him as a constituent and asked, "Help me understand why you voted no," I have never had a response. That is the second reason I am running for the Kansas House of Representative, to be a representative that listens to the concerns of District 104 and takes the voters' voices to Topeka, because that is the role of a representative and a civil servant. I am running as a moderate on the Democratic ticket. My campaign has been solely financed by individual donors, Republican, Independent, Democrat, and yes, even a Libertarian. This has been a true bipartisan campaign. And while this may have driven me to run, I also know that our community has real needs in healthcare, tax reform, rural agricultural, industry, and small businesses, and the needs of the community to find ways to grow and thrive in Buhler, Inman, and Hutchinson. I know this because I have attended numerous events, city council, school board meetings, and forums where both my opponent and I were invited and didn't show up. I believe the role of representative is to listen to the voters, do the research, and work with others to create legislation that meets the needs of District 105 and our state. To do this, I am personally engaging with the voters both individually and in their community, and I will continue this practice after I'm elected and respond to my constituents. I ask for your vote with either early voting or when you head to the polls on November 5th. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Krieger-Zook. Next, we'll hear from District 102 candidate Kyler Sweely.
I'm going to start with a couple of points and then I'll go to my fully closing statement, but I just know that my opponent will touch on this. He's going to say something about the AFP and the Kansas Chamber and the big bad Republicans and all this money that they've spent and everything else like that. And I don't coordinate with outside groups. You know, if outside groups are there to help, then that's how they do, and you can't really deny that or accept that. It's just, that's how it is. Jason talks about being financed and overspending and all of this stuff about major campaign contributions. And in 2020, Jason outspent his last Republican opponent almost 15 to 1, $56,000 to, I believe, $3,500. And then in 2022, he outspent his opponent $61,000 to $4,700. And you know, there's checks from max contributions from individuals in New York, San Francisco, Chicago, and Seattle. And I mean, you ask, why would someone get checks like this in Kansas? It's because the radical liberal agenda wants to move to Kansas to make their state not look so bad. And we have a representative that's in a very conservative area. And, you know, it's a Trump plus 15 district. You can say whatever you want, but I see a high number of conservatives not spoken for in Topeka. You know, we have a 45% unaffiliated district, and we have a representative that votes for men and women's sports, men and women's locker rooms. You know, he voted for a child transgender, you know, or voted not to ban child transgender realignment surgeries and hormonal treatments that they may never be able to come back from. We have somebody that falls directly in line with, you know, Governor Kelly and the administration in DC, and we obviously all see the problems there. Are you better off the last 4 years, or are you better off under President Trump in 2016 and 2020? And this district's voted for President Trump at a rate of plus 15 points. And I promise you, Jason will not publicly say who he's going to be voting for in the November election for the president.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. And next we will hear from Representative Jason Probst.
Well, there you have it, folks. When you don't have ideas and you don't have a firm grasp on the issues, and you are put into this district because your handlers told you to come here and take a seat away from legitimate candidates, this is the sort of thing you resort to. He was told, move here, we'll take care of your campaign for you. And it turns out, Hutchinson, as any of us who have lived here for any time knows, march to the beat of our own drum. And we don't let people from outside this area tell us how we should live, what we should do, and we talk to each other. And there's not a person out there that I won't talk to. And I see some of you in this audience, and you disagree with me fiercely. There's not one of you I wouldn't sit down and have a cup of coffee with and talk about the issues with. I am not here to impose my will on you. I am here to listen and go to Topeka and take a very complex basket of information that comes from many sources and use what I know about this district and the conversations I have with people here and make the most sound and practical and pragmatic decisions I can make. If you have a very clear choice in this election. If you want a partisan hack who's going to do what he's told, that's your guy right there. If you want a guy who's voted against the governor to override her, who's gotten in trouble with the governor's office before, who's managed to get things through despite being in the minority party, who understands how to talk to people across the aisle, all stripes of people, who doesn't go into those conversations with judgment and hatred, but goes into those with an effort to understand and solve problems, then you probably want to stick with me.
Thank you, Mr. Probst.
I'd like to say something real quick. I've never had a handler, and the only time that I've
Point of
ever
order.
answered the call is a call of service to this country.
Mr. Sweeley, we only give 2 minutes to each candidate. Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to Senate District 34, Michael Murphy.
No, thank you. I'm not going to be unkind to you, Shanna. I'm going to spare you the part of my closing was about the CTE program that I worked hard on, so I'm going to spare you with that part. Another thing I worked on 3 years ago, I was one of the first in the nation to bring legislation to help curb ESG metrics against Kansas citizens and businesses, and I fought pretty hard for that. It took 2 years, and I got part of that through. I still have more to do, but we did get some of that passed into law. I started last year a program to help monetary policy. I think we all see what is going on with our dollar, with inflation and all like that. Article 1, Section 10 of our Constitution allows states to have a currency if they want. And I don't think we just need to go out and just make a currency just to have a currency. But I think we need to have something in place so in case something comes along, like we lose the dollar due to drastic inflation or a CBDC. So it's something like that. So I've worked on that and I plan to continue that work. The other thing I did is I stood against our leadership and got 340B drug pricing through. I worked across the aisle, I worked across the rotunda, and we got that through. And just to give you an idea, we talked about Medicaid expansion earlier. This program is just for Prairie Star alone, for one drug manufacturer, nets them $500,000 a year. And that's not tax dollars. So those are the sorts of things I've been working on, and I want to continue to do that. I just hope you'll say I like Mike on November 5th.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. And lastly, we will hear from candidate Shanna Henry.
Wow, I got to go first, and I get to go last. I like that. I have so much I want to say that but I want to summarize with this. Some of the questions we had to ask for surveys really made me think about things in a way I had never thought about them before. And one of the most interesting questions was, what characteristics or principles are most important for an elected official? My answer was integrity, honesty, and dedication are extremely important to do the work of the people as an elected official. This is what I will do for you. I may not have all the answers. I know I don't have all the answers, but I will find out what the answers are. I will do my homework. I will do the research. I will find out what is the best. I will listen to the constituents of this district. That is probably my main number one job, is to listen to the constituents of the district and what their needs are. I also want you to know that I will continue to fight for the issues that are the most important to me and the ones I know the most about, and that is I will continue to fight for Medicare, Medicaid, or CanCare expansion, as it's often called. CanCare is the official name. Medicaid expansion is the unofficial name. I will fight for that in Kansas. Our state is one of only 10 states in the country that have not passed Medicaid expansion. All of our bordering states have and are enjoying the benefits of reduced health care costs to their citizens, for their citizens. Medicaid expansion will also help protect Kansans from excessive medical debt and will strengthen and preserve our district's many rural hospitals, which our district has a lot of. And I also will fully support our public education system. And much work also needs to be done to improve rural
Thank you,
broadband
Ms.
for our
Henry.
rural communities. And I ask for your vote on November 5th. Oh, they cut me off.
All right. Thank you.
Vote on November 5th.
Please join me for one more round of applause for these candidates.